Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show.
Gazette Sports Podcast. I
Yep.
do it every couple weeks, but yeah, it's audio only. So Apple and Spotify, I think.
There you go.
Yeah.
Evan's also had a ton of written pieces out in the last week.
Oh, this is no audio.
Oh, are you messing up our audio in there, Chloe?
I can't read lips. Sounds
Oh,
Is that better? Can you hear us now? Oh. All right, there we go.
There
We're
we
good.
go.
Okay, I'll replug all of that.
no,
We
you
got-
didn't miss anything.
We got Evan Rawal in from the Denver Gazette. Evan was on the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast a couple days ago, talking about the Mikko Rantanen trade. He's also had a ton of written pieces out this week, dissecting the Rantanen trade, talking to different folks. So we're very lucky to have him in here, helping us. We're a week removed, and it's honestly kind of crazy that it's already been a week. It was a bananas Friday, Saturday, Sunday last week. You were in Boston. I was catching up with the team in New York. Megan was sick, and suddenly everyone had to spring into action, all kind of in different spots. So we wanted to kind of put a bow on everything. We don't want to spend the rest of the season talking about Mikko Rantanen and the trade and all that, but we are 1 week removed. The Avs are back at home tonight. Mikko Rantanen scored his first goal as a Carolina Hurricane last night. So we just want to kind of take a step back, look at it all a week later. And then for me, I also want us to get in a little bit of maybe what we see coming next, what the Avs could do, what we think the Avs maybe should do. And then we are going to unpack some jaw-dropping numbers that we saw this morning as the NHL and the NHLPA put out the salary cap projections for next season. Megan, you and I jumped on an emergency pod together. Like I said, you were running back from the drugstore trying to get some medicine.
Did you do the pod from like Walgreens?
I was in a car.
Yeah.
Parked.
There you go.
Flying down I-25, no hands on the wheel. But so you and I really haven't had a chance to talk, at least on a show, about it since. Evan, you and I have talked a bunch, when we were in New York and things like that. But I guess, Evan, I'll start with you. 1 week later, how has this all kind of settled with you? Does it, like watching him score that goal last night, for me, it still looks weird to see Mikko Rantanen wearing a different team's jersey?
It is weird. It was weird going in the locker room today and seeing, I guess yesterday, Drury was in his spot in the practice locker room, and then Net just has a spot in the Avs locker room. So, it's still weird getting over it. I haven't really watched the Hurricanes other than I saw some clips. So he doesn't look normal in that jersey, but that'll just, you got to take some getting used to. And yeah, I mean, I've kind of dissected it all. I kind of, I do think people need to move on, and a lot of people are moving on.
Yeah.
So that's good to see, but yeah, it's going to be different, and it's been different on the ice. And I think the Avs are still adjusting to not having him here. And yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch the next 3 months and then how it's going to play out for years, because it's going to impact the team for years, really.
Well, and what you just said about people, starting to move on. Jared Bednar made that comment this morning of like, it's fine to still feel those things, like, referring to the players, but we got to turn the page. Megan, same question to you. A week later, just how has all of this kind of sat with you?
Well, in hearing Bednar talk about the importance of the team moving on and needing to digest this rather quickly, I think about the importance of them not only needing to process it themselves, but also they have a new task at hand, which is helping the new players to get integrated and feel comfortable. And so I think you don't want to get too caught up then in processing the emotion of a teammate leaving, that you don't go through the motions of bringing new guys into the fold, making them feel really comfortable. And I think back to players like Russ, Colton, Miles Wood, who were once new players themselves, playing on a line with a Jack Drury. And I hope that they tap into the knowledge of having been the new guy just last season to give him kind of the rundown of everything that they wish they had known a year ago. But for me personally, it is still certainly weird. And that's why I regret being a little bit sick. Maybe I was sick by the news, Maybe
I
it made
regret
me
being
sick.
That was fully up to you. Yes.
No, like maybe this news made me sick, but I wasn't able to be at practice yesterday. So I asked you a little bit earlier what the locker room was like, because consistently since the goaltending trades, that locker room at Family Sports has been really light. Even when they've maybe come on the heels of a losing game, it's still been really light with guys bantering across the way at each other. So I was curious if it was still kind of light like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a weird locker room, and just in terms of how guys trickled in. So
Okay.
like, that
Fair.
But I don't know. It felt pretty normal, right?
Yeah,
Good.
it was normal. Blackwood's still cracking jokes left and right.
Yeah.
Good.
So yeah, it was normal. Like Netchus and Drury stayed out late, just probably because they were getting some extra work in, probably getting used to the altitude too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it felt normal. And then today there's like 6 people in the locker room, so
Yeah.
you can't judge it from there.
I heard them though before, since it wasn't optional, there were a lot of guys doing the weight room stuff.
Yeah.
And they were loud and seemed like they were having a blast.
Nice.
So that was good.
Yeah. Well, so I want to talk about Drury and Netchus, focus on the Abs side of this deal. Jared Bednar made a comment yesterday that I thought, I don't know, maybe it shouldn't be that interesting or groundbreaking. Maybe he said, look, we don't bring players in to hope for them to be the same guy that they have been. We want to bring guys in and be able to elevate their play. We bring in players that we think we can get more out of. Through the first week, 3 games on the road, I think it's hard to be anything other than very pleased with what you've seen from Marty Netchus, Jack Drury. Jack Drury already 2 goals. Marty Netchus brings just a different dynamic. Now, I'm not saying it's better. I'm not saying it's in the same, elite tiers, Mikko Rantanen, but he brings a different element to that top group. Evan, what have been your thoughts? You were the first one that made the observation that I didn't really think about. Nathan McKinnon playing with another righty, kind of, full time here.
Yeah, it's been an adjustment, I think, for both of them, because you can see both of them deferring to each other. And Netchus made that comment during the trip. He's like, "Hey, I was deferring to him. Like, I got 3 hours of sleep. I was trying to just." And when you play with Nathan McKinnon, I'm sure your natural instinct is like, I get him the puck.
Yeah.
And part of me wonders, like, is there enough? There's only one puck on the ice, and they both like to have the puck. Like, maybe if at some point you move one of them away from the others. So, but I think it's been great so far. In New York, they were whipping it around to each other. Same thing in Long Island. They just couldn't score. Like, they need a shooter on that line. Somebody's got to take the ball by horns there and start shooting. And Nate is shooting less this year, so I wonder if at some point they're going to be like, Nate, you got to start being the shooter again.
Yeah.
But it's been great, and Drury's been really good. He's going to add a different element to that bottom 6. He hasn't really taken that many faceoffs, but we know he's a good faceoff guy, and you can see immediately that, what did Jared say today? He's like, he hasn't made any mistakes in the system.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do that, Jared's going to like you a lot.
Yeah.
So I think he's going to be somebody that they really trust down the stretch here.
Another point that you made to me when we were sitting at MSG watching Avs Rangers was, you said, well, man, Nate's going to be able to play 35 minutes a night with how much Marty Netchus is willing to carry that puck to the neutral zone. Megan, was that anything that you picked up on, that this zone entry machine that has always been Nathan McKinnon suddenly has a second zone entry machine at his disposal with Marty Netchus being able to carry that puck to the neutral zone a lot?
Yeah, I mean, it was even observable on the power play that Netchus was a player after Cale Makar was bodied after a face-off. They had to reset, re-enter, and Netchus was a huge reason why they were able to. And that was such a frustration for the power play lately. But even outside of it, you see the way in which his speed can be utilized in transition to be another player, just another option to help them gain the zone. And I think it translates well not only to entries, because in seeing around the league, he's one of the best players for controlled entries per 60, and it translates immediately in what we're seeing with the Avs. But I think just the possession overall is made better because of his speed, because he cycles the puck so quickly using his speed. It gave them more options around the net front to complete a passing play just a little bit lower in the slot. And I think that is more dangerous, harder to contend with. And players like Duran are on board with that too. Lehkonen, if so, if they're kind of alternating between those guys. And that just all leads back to Netchus adding something new and more options there.
We talked so much about the shock of Mikko Rantanen and like him probably not expecting, or not probably, him not expecting it and having to deal with all that and digest all of it. I imagine Marty Netchus is pretty stoked here. Yeah,
he is. I mean, you're going to play with Nathan MacKinnon. Like, how can you not be stoked? And we knew over the summer, like, there were rumblings that I think Carolina was looking to deal him anyway. So I don't know if it was from his camp, like if he wanted out or if they were just looking to move him, but he got moved into as good a situation as probably he could have hoped for in this. So, yeah, I mean, for a young guy, just having the best season of his career to now go suddenly play with Nathan MacKinnon, you're going to play 22 minutes a night or something here where he's playing 18. He's going to play more. He's on the top power play unit. Like, how could you not ask for a better situation than this?
Yeah. Yeah. No, honestly.
It's elevated minutes. I think Carolina wasn't sure what to do with him and being really happy with their top 6 picture. He was kind of utilizing a third line role, knowing full well he's a top 6 player. And I think coming to Colorado, though, it's a huge leap in responsibility to assume the top line minutes that Nathan MacKinnon takes on. I'm sure, to Evan's point, that's something that he's really excited about, to be trusted with that opportunity.
It's a big step up in minutes, in responsibility and expectations. And I think all of that's good. And again, like the one thing I've pointed out to people this season, he has not historically had the same, production levels, but like he's not that far off the pace of Mikko Rantanen's point totals for this season right now. They're coming in different ways, but like if Nathan MacKinnon can continue to help elevate Marty Netchus, like for at least this season, the Avs may not end up seeing that big of a drop-off in production from what Mikko gave you to what Marty Netchus has a potential to.
Yeah, a lot of this trade is a bet on Nathan MacKinnon being the driver and not Mikko Rantanen. Not that Mikko Rantanen isn't an elite talent, which he is, and I've had to fight people on social media about that are just, he's gone and they're ready to move on, which I get, but like he is still an incredible hockey player. Yeah. So Netchus is he was a top 10 pick himself. Like, it's not like he's not talented, but you're counting on Nate to be the guy that takes him to the next level. And we've already seen Nate take him under his wing. He's talking to him all the time at practice. They're working before and after practice. So this is what Nate can do. And this is what you're banking on. And that's why you're paying him $12.5 million or whatever you're paying him.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the Avs are seeing the salary cap here, maybe like, okay, if Netchus maybe doesn't want to put up 100 points this year, that'd be great, because then we got to pay him. But you're banking on Nate to make this guy take another step.
Yeah, I want to circle back to. There's a few bets that the Avs are making here, and I'm with you. I think that's a big one of it. That not only do we think that Nate can elevate Marty Netchus, but we also think that Nate was elevating Mikko Rantanen just enough. Again, not that he's not an elite player, but just enough that we think that we can find a nice middle ground. But like I said, knowing everything we know now, and the everyone that we've all been able to talk to over the last week, and seeing what the return was, and understanding the time that we had until the trade deadline. Mikko made the comment to me last week, hey, look, I understand they didn't want to risk losing me for nothing. So he at least acknowledged that it was a possibility he was going to walk to free agency. And I just want to know, again, hindsight's 2020 in retro, what would you have done? Would you have traded Mikko this early? Would you have waited till the deadline to see if you would have got something done? I've talked to a few people who have said, I would have done whatever it took, whatever dollar figure he wanted, I would have eventually gotten there. Do you guys have any strong opinions on I think they made ultimately the right move. I would have waited. I would have whatever.
Yeah.
Just any thoughts?
I mean, I talked to an NHL coach the other day, which you can read on denvergazette.com.
There you go.
But basically the word he used was, and we had to change it to gutsy for the paper, but he said ballsy.
Yeah.
Like, it's a ballsy move by McFarland. And the other thing he said is, elite talent is irreplaceable in this league. You just can't replace it because you have to find it and develop it. So to give it up, it really hurts. But McFarland doing this right now gives him time to see how this team adjusts, and he still has 6 weeks until the deadline to make additional moves. So credit to McFarland. Like, it is a gutsy move. Like, I don't know how many GMs in the league would have made this move.
Seriously.
And he took a lot of heat for it, and we'll see how it works out. But, they obviously had a position, and I think it just came down to the fact that they had negotiated for 8 months, 9 months, probably longer than that, because they probably talked before it was officially allowed to sign a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And they just
tampering in the NHL? No way.
No. And they just figured this isn't happening. Rip the Band-Aid off. And I also think Tulsky talked about it. There was a time element too, because we know Vancouver and Carolina were talking. So I'm sure that they were like, if you want to do this, we have to do it now.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're making another move.
I do think that the whispers out of Vancouver drove a little bit the timing of this, just because that's still in the works. They're keen to move one of those players.
Yeah.
And I also think about how the Avs roster was constructed in the Cup run, and how in this cap era, even though it's changing before our eyes, it's been hard for any team to keep the top talent at the head of the lineup as heavy as the Avs have carried. Like, it is such a luxury to have had at one point a Landeskog, a Nichushkin, a Lehkonen, and then you've of course got Rantanen and McKinnon also at the top of the lineup. Duran's kind of the newer player that's entered the fold there to have those options. And then of course Makar up top and Taves. And so I think they were looking at how this was a luxury they just couldn't afford. Like, you even look at an Edmonton and they've got McDavid, Draisaitl, and then the complementary pieces around it. They do have to get a little bit creative, whether it's Skinner for a year or players like Hyman and Nugent Hopkins, who are, in my opinion, like, Nichushkin and Lehkonen in terms of being complementary pieces that are in a different tier, right? And so every team has to confront, though, where they could carry the top talent. And so for the Avs to have had 3 in Makar, McKinnon, and Rantanen was already quite a luxury that I think, especially with the information around the cap today, I don't know how much of that information, front office was privy to, but it limited where they were able to invest. And in seeing the new investment at goaltending, where they previously had built that part of the lineup a little bit differently, I think it had to happen, in particular because of the lack of depth. We've seen with the number of injuries where they haven't found the players that hit at the bottom of the lineup. You do want a league minimum contract guy to be a fourth line option and hit the same way that fourth line came together in the Cup run. But there's such a stark difference between how the Avs fourth line has been constructed this year compared to that fourth line in 2022. And it's so big a difference that it could be detrimental to a playoff run. And I think those were the decisions that they had to immediately confront now, so that they could get a little bit of cap relief in the immediate with $1 million off the top from Rantanen leaving, and start addressing then a lack of depth. And that means a couple roster players to fill out the bottom of the lineup. And it stinks because you are sacrificing a core piece. But I think with the way all teams around the league are constructed, it was just going to be a matter of time.
For me, from the Avs perspective, knowing what we know, and obviously there's stuff always behind the scenes that we don't get to see, but I think Chris McFarland, to the point of that, the coach that you spoke to, I think it was a ballsy move. I would like to think that, if I were Chris McFarland, I would have done the same thing. The one person that I think would maybe do things over again if they could is Mikko. To me, this almost, given how surprised he was, given the comments he made to Peter Baugh, the chat that I had with him, I feel like his agent overplayed their hand a little bit. I feel like Mikko wanted to stay here, and I don't know if he was fully privy to just how hard his agent was negotiating this. And because clearly, to your point, Evan, it got to a point where Chris McFarland said, yeah, we're not going to be able to bridge this gap.
I mean, I think I have a hard time thinking Mikko didn't have an idea when it goes this long, and this agent had just negotiated an extension for Blackwood. So it's not like the Avs and him can't work it out.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there was shock in the fact that Miko was probably thinking, oh, we just talked last week about contract and there's still 6 weeks till the deadline. And I think that's where the shock is, that they have pulled the trigger so quickly.
Yeah.
But I think deep down, Miko probably knew that this was a possibility. And
Had to have.
that's just the reality of the business. And when you're negotiating a deal like this, that, you know, if you can't come to an agreement at this point, then yeah, it's probably an option. So I do think there was shock, but I don't think it was like oh, I never thought this would happen in a million years, which Nate said, but also, you know, you never know. I don't know. It's a business.
I imagine that, because at first I was saying there's no way they did this without the sign off of Nathan McKinnon and Jared Bednar. I do get the sense, more people I've talked to, that they were caught off guard by it. But I think in that same kind of light, I have to imagine that this was a conversation had with them at some point. Hey, just so you guys know, these negotiations are going on. If we can't get to a point where it all comes together, we may have to move on from Miko. Like, I think everyone was shocked by the timing of it, not that it was a possibility.
If you get Nate involved, you risk the chance of it somehow getting to Miko too.
Yeah.
So I think you kind of have to withhold maybe some of that from him.
That's not fair to Nate, for Chris McFarland to put him in that position
to tell him.
Yeah,
you mean? Yeah,
because his input, you know, it's either okay, go ahead and do it, and then he's the player who signed off on trading Mikko Rantanen. That wouldn't be cool. Or he doesn't agree with it, but it's not his decision to make. It's the front office decision. And it's not that the leader shouldn't have any input, but there's a difference between talking to your leaders about players that are coming in newly and what you feel about them, or the players going to the front office and saying, we think this guy would be a great fit here culturally. But it's different to put a player in that position with sending a player out. And I think that's just to avoid the impossible position you'd be putting a leader like McKinnon in. And I think, to Evan's point about Mikko Rantanen, he's a 28-year-old man with autonomy. I think that he is included in this a responsible enough amount. Like, I do wonder if it was like a game of chicken and he thought that he had more leverage and that this was just a tough part of negotiation to try and leverage a better contract for himself, and didn't realize the game of chicken that was at hand, that at any point, though, the car could be veered off the road and it's done. The game is done. And so that's where I think things went maybe a little bit sideways. Maybe it wasn't clear to him the stakes right now in January, right, with weeks ahead of the deadline. But I've been hearing from people that there's almost 2 deadlines this year with the 4 Nations break, and that is what has incentivized other teams to move quickly before the 4 Nations break. And so I just wonder if that is another layer that made this different and maybe caught a person like Mikko Rantanen off guard.
I think to that point, and the point, Evan, that you made a minute ago about, you know, the fact that Chris McFarland now has some runway until the deadline to see, you know, what he's got, in combination with the fact that I genuinely do think that the return for this goes down every week you get closer to the deadline. Right now, Mikko Rantanen is still a pending unrestricted free agent. You and I were talking yesterday at practice. If I'm Mikko, why wouldn't I go to market at this point?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I mean, sorry to the Hurricanes fans, but to me, he has no loyalty to that organization. Like, you're 5 months from free agency, at least see what's out there.
Yeah. Maybe even sign back with Carolina.
Yeah.
But why wouldn't you at least get yourself to the market? You know, I think all of that, the fact that with every day you get closer, Mikko Rantanen's got more leverage in the negotiation. You get closer to the trade deadline, whether it be, you know, a guy like Netchus is no longer available, or suddenly there's not a team who really has the right fit to make Mikko Rantanen work. I think it was a move they had to make. But like I said, I wanted to circle back to the bet or bets that Chris McFarland is making here. And the first one is what you mentioned earlier, Evan. They're betting that Nathan McKinnon can elevate Marty Netchus to be a high-end first-line player, 100-point guy, or at least point per game. He is also betting that with this additional cap flexibility in tandem with what is coming, which is a $10 million bump, he's saying, I think I can take this team, remove Mikko Rantanen, replace him with someone whose production will be close, and make this team deeper, and go into the offseason with some money to spend and fill out this roster in a way more closely aligned with what we saw 2 years ago. That is the bet that Chris McFarland is making. The two people that he absolutely had to get the sign off on to make this move is Josh Kroenke and Joe Sakic. And there's no way those guys sign off on this without Chris McFarland having some semblance of a plan for, here's what I want to do with the extra flexibility I'm going to get, and here's how I'm going to do it. I'm sure he's not giving, detailed names. Here's each player I'm going to sign, but here's the type of player we're going to target. Here's how we're going to try to round this out. And I think that's the part where to your point about having to argue with people on Twitter for the last week, like I'm really kind of reserving judgment on this whole deal until we get to training camp of next season, because that will really tell kind of the full story and the full scope of what Chris McFarland's attempting to do with all of this.
Yeah, and it goes beyond that too, because if you lock Mikko in, then you locked him in for 8 years. So there's a lot to play out here, a lot to play out this season, over the summer. And, we can judge it right now, but it's not going to be a complete trade for, I would say, at least a few years.
Yeah. With the extra flexibility, Megan, is there anything that you would like to see them do based on where we know this roster sits, a little bit of flexibility they got? Do you have any moves that are kind of like in your head for between now and March 7th?
Absolutely. And that's where it feels easy to say even the assessment now is premature, because it does feel like there's a second part of this trade only made possible because Mikko was traded first. And one of the areas I've seen Evan talking about on the back end is a defenseman. I think the Sean Walker acquisition last deadline, something like that makes so much sense. A player that can play in a third pair role, but up into a second pair role if needed, as needed. And I think that's what they don't have right now. They have third pair options that are pretty solidly third pair options, and you don't feel comfortable or trusting of them playing up in the lineup. I think that's what they're missing. And so a Sean Walker type player makes a lot of sense.
I'm at the point where I'm wondering if they even think they're third pair options or even third pair options. Like, DeHaan barely plays anymore. Sam Malinsky took that break, and I asked today, like, how do you think he's looked? And he's like, okay. I don't think, to me, he struggled for 2 months now, and I think they're at the point where it's like, okay, we need to upgrade him. We need, and Keaton Middleton, they like him, but I think they understand that if this gets to a 7-game series and he's playing, that he's going to get targeted by the opposing teams. So, and then that's not even bringing up the fact that Josh Manson is just, you don't know what you're getting on a shift-to-shift basis with him at this point. Like, when Jared was like, yeah, he's hurt, but that doesn't excuse his decision-making on the ice. It's like, yeah, that's pretty telling. Like, he's making pinches, he's throwing pizzas up the middle of the ice, and it's like, oh boy. Yeah. If they could find a second pairing defenseman, is hard to find, but I think that's the ideal situation, is to get somebody to move him down. Because I think he's struggling right now. And it's at the point where Sam is covering for him and not the other way around, which is what most people like to think that pair is, and it's not really the case.
I agree. I think all of this is born from trouble with Josh Manson. I think if DeHaan Malinsky had stayed DeHaan Malinsky, maybe we would have been okay with it. But in Josh Manson's absence, because of injury, we see Malinsky play up in the lineup. We don't love what we see. The Malinsky that kind of returns from that once Manson's back in the lineup wasn't the Malinsky that started this year in a third pair role. And so I think it all comes back to Manson not playing to expectation, and Bednar's comments about him making poor decisions are very telling. I think that lack of trust is why they need to feel comfortable with someone playing up in a second pair role, perhaps in his place.
I've even wondered kind of aloud recently if, I don't know, can you find someone to take Josh Manson at the deadline? If you feel you can upgrade him, could you move him out and then give yourself even more cap flexibility?
Well, yeah, and I had heard that they have been sniffing around Seth Jones, but that's a very difficult deal to make with how much he's making. Chicago, you would have to have them eat some of that, but then you're probably having to send them a big contract like a Josh Manson.
Yep.
I think he has a no trade clause to a certain extent. I can't remember exactly what it is, but that's just a difficult trade to make at this point. And that's where you kind of get into the issue of clauses that some of these guys have that are making decent money where you would want that cap flexibility.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. It's, we knew that to your point, Megan, that the Four Nations was going to be a kind of a cutoff, but I do think teams are either using that as a deadline or using those 2 weeks as real hard assessment of who their teams are and what they need, not only for this season, but beyond. And then we got a lot more clarity on what beyond is really going to look like as teams are gearing up for the salary cap to go up. And they could probably also gear up with some 7 Brew coffee. 7 Brew is a one of a kind drive-through and walk-up experience with a fast and friendly crew that is waiting to serve you. From rich, bold coffee to refreshing energy drinks, smoothies, teas, and more, 7 Brew has you covered. With over 20,000 flavor combinations, there's a perfect drink for everyone. At 7 Brew, they believe in cultivating kindness with every cup, and their fully customizable menu is just the beginning. Before you hit the road, power up with 7 Brew in Firestone, their newest 7 Brew location, and experience the coffee revolution. Some delicious drinks up there. I haven't been up recently, and I need to get up there.
I do too.
To 7 Brew. But like I said, the salary cap projections for next season did come out, and I am curious how those are going to impact the way that teams make decisions for this season. Let me ask this. Let me just kind of get this out of the way. I'm going to pull up the exact numbers for the next couple of years. You made mention of it a minute ago, Evan, but for anybody out there that thinks Chris McFarland woke up this morning and saw that and is like, oh man,
I could have signed Miko.
I didn't know that. I imagine that he had a very good idea. I think we're all in agreement with that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That I imagine it's something that they saw coming. But here we go. So right now, the NHL and the NHLPA forecasting for the next 3 seasons. Right now, the salary cap currently sits at $88 million. Next year, it is projected to jump to 95.5. The season after that, it's going to go up to 104. And then the season after that, 113.5. These are significant cap jumps here. I think the biggest that we've seen yet in the salary cap era, and also just a massive change from what it has been post-COVID, where the cap sat flat from 2020 up until this past summer before teams finally did get a little bit of relief. This is obviously going to lead to bigger contract numbers, but in terms of cap percentage, do you think this maybe feels a little bit like a trap for teams? I think about Chicago, who suddenly have a ton of money to spend, and it's going to just turn into an excuse for teams to go out and hand out really dumb contracts.
It could, but I think there's been talk of like teams taking internal caps, and I do wonder how much that's going to come up now, because like, what do I think Ottawa's going to go out there in 2 years spending $104 million up to the cap? Like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this is going to create maybe more of like a, what we saw before the salary cap, where these teams that can spend money are going to spend money, and the teams that maybe don't have as much money are just going to be, they can't afford to spend $113 million. So it's going to be interesting. Like, Chicago is going to be one of those teams that can throw money around, and that's why, like, people that think Mikko won't get $14 million somewhere, I'm like, I think he could. If he hits the market, he easily could. Chicago's a team that could do that. So they're desperate to get Bedard help, and he can sign an extension this summer, and they want to do that, but they got to show him we're serious about trying to win here. So there are going to be some teams that can throw money around, and maybe that's not always the best decision.
Wouldn't that be fucking wild if Mikko Rantanen signed with the Blackhawks? Because then you would end up with Paul Stastny leaving the Avs, staying in division. You trading Ryan O'Reilly out east, him ending up back in the division. Trading Matt Duchene east, him ending up back in the division. And then if you traded Mikko Rantanen east, only to have him end up back in the division, boy, wouldn't that just be a little bit crazy. Megan, your kind of initial thoughts when you saw the projections come out this morning, I guess how they relate to, the Avs or just, like I said, I think this could result in some teams just doing some really stupid things because there's this kind of, allure of being able to spend.
Yeah. Well, and Evan's comment earlier about the NHL, was it coach or GM who said that top talent is irreplaceable? I think it is something I think about, that there are teams that don't even have a Rantanen. They don't have a McKinnon, they don't have a Makar, but they also don't even have a Rantanen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think teams in that position of being desperate to have a star player to sort of build around or support a young budding star could get a little bit desperate to add a piece like that. I think that's when I talk about luxuries the Avs can't afford. It truly is a luxury to have a team with the talent at the top the way that the Avs do. Not every NHL team gets to have their McDavid Draisaitl, gets to have their McKinnon Makar. And so I do think there are teams like that that will look the quick fix to get better by adding a player like that.
And see, that's where I think people are going to do silly stuff. I think people are going to talk themselves into players being superstars and, throwing some crazy dollar figures around that literally we've never seen in the NHL.
Well, like I'd have to look at what the free agent list is this summer, but I know like a guy like Nikolai Ehlers is a free agent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, does he suddenly go from like a $7-8 million to somebody's going to give him $10 million?
Right.
Then that's where you kind of get into the issue where it's going to be like the people that said, oh, the Avs can. That's why the Netschus thing is great, because I think he's probably the best player they could have gotten in any deal like this, and he's locked in for next year. But like the people that were saying, oh shit, they should let him walk and fill those spots with 2 $6 million players or something like that. Well, $6 million player, Mal, might be like 2 Ross Coltons.
Yeah,
Are you a better team with
something
2 Ross
different.
Coltons? Like, I don't know. So it is going to be interesting. Like, I think there's a lot of the teams that have been connected to Rantanen, like maybe this summer. I'm like thinking Utah, St. Louis's name is out there. Like, he could easily end up back in the division. I saw Edmonton. I was like, as soon as Cap Friendly went down, my math went out the window as far as these teams go. But like, somebody's going to pay him. I think.
Yeah. Utah's an interesting one. That would be like a big splash that I could see.
Their owner would want to make a big
I could
Right.
see, just what he did even around the draft.
Mm-hmm. And have Mikko debut the new jersey and stuff like that. I'm just going to read off the top 10 listed free agent pending UFAs here, based on their current cap hit. Mitch Marner, Mikko Rantanen, Aaron Ekblad, Nikolai Ehlers, Brock Besser, Brock Nelson, Jacob Chychrun, Claude Giroux, Matt Duchene. Should also make note, Brad Marchand is a couple spots down the list. Elliot Friedman was talking about that on 32 Thoughts today, that suddenly Brad Marchand's name is something that's coming up out there as they have slipped out of a playoff spot. That was one that I did think, I was like, well, wouldn't that be interesting? Bring Nate's Nova Scotia buddy here.
It would make sense. I don't know. I haven't really paid much attention to Boston this year, but like, I'm assuming he's 36 at this point, 37. Like, he's probably taken a step back, and he's not the player that he once was, but it does make sense. And, especially to me with the uncertainty around Val, like they're hoping he's healthy after 4 Nations. Like, how do you really know? Like, this has gone on longer than I'm sure they hoped, and you just really don't know. Maybe a Marchand would be nice.
Yeah.
I like a leader who's won before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's like the appeal of the Crosby conversation. I have not been entertaining that as a serious thing, just to clarify, but I see the appeal of a veteran type player who's won before.
Well, and I mean, talk about Marchand being something different from what you've got. Like, he is definitely different.
He's different.
A lot of
so
hate
funny.
for Marchand. I think he's a guy that you hate, but if he's on your team, you're probably like, oh, I don't hate him that much.
Yeah, exactly. He is, to your point, a little bit of a step back this year, still on pace for a 30-goal season, more than 60 points. I don't know. Like, that's a guy where and I mean, obviously we're well into hypotheticals at this point, but if you added a guy like that and you went him with McKinnon and Netschus, and then, you got way more flexibility on what you want to do there on your second line. You can put Casey Middlestat with much better players, or, I don't know. I just think that I thought that was interesting, that's now a name that is suddenly out there a little bit of, hey, if this slide continues a little bit for Boston, they could be someone who would be looking to capitalize on getting something back for him before he potentially walks in the summer. If he knows that team is entering into a rebuild, he is 36, probably wanting to chase a cup at least one more time. I don't know. I think that's an interesting option. I do also think, and I think, Evan, you and I were talking about this morning. I don't know. If you go through this Four Nations tournament and you realize, hey, Val isn't going to be ready coming out of it, do you take the LTIR approach with him? And if that's a guy that you don't think could be back until playoffs, I don't know. Do you go that route and suddenly give yourself a ton of cap space to go out and do something? I don't know, but I think there's a lot of decisions to be made here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, cap space is one thing, assets is another, and the Avs don't exactly have a ton of tradable assets. Now they have 2 second-rounders this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if they don't have either of those in a month and a half. But they really just don't have a lot to
Still
trade.
have their first
No,
this year?
That was the Walker deal.
Okay, yeah.
That was the get rid of Johansson deal. Yeah, they just don't have a lot unless they're really like, if there's some, like, we haven't talked about Casey Middlestad, and like, I think he's playing better, but there's also, he still doesn't look like the guy that we saw at the end of last year. And I don't know really if there's an upgrade unless you go get a JT Miller or Elias Pettersson, like what the realistic shot of that is. But like, I don't know how you upgrade on that, like with the assets that you have.
I'm not to see the reaction from the chat about Marchand. I feel that way about JT Miller. I do not
you told
love
me that
the idea of JT Miller. So I guess I wanted to hear outside of my own thoughts that I don't think that would be a very good fit. What do you guys think?
I've never covered JT Miller, so I know what I'm about to say is a little bit me guessing a bit. I don't think that would fit well in this locker room, and I think that has conflict between him and Nate written all over it. For me personally,
that's the thing with Marchand. It's like Nate likes Marchand.
They're
if
very
Nate
good friends.
Likes you. Do we trust Nate's judgment? Right? He's picked some good ones.
Well, and I also agree with Evan that I think Brad Marchand is fully, like, I fully expected that response in the chat.
Oh yeah.
But again, if he played for the Avs and was doing that stuff and drawing penalties and giving little shots, everyone in the chat would be like, I love Brad Marchand. What a, he gets under people's skin like nobody else. I don't think that's the same type of thing with JT Miller.
No, exactly. I think there's a difference. And Marchand stopped licking people, so he's turned a corner.
After COVID. JT Miller?
He's still got like 7 years on that deal, doesn't he? Like, I feel like that is a deal that could hemorrhage a team eventually. Like, he's still a good player. I
agree.
I don't know. And even Elias Pettersson, like, he's got a huge contract where it's like, is he even that player anymore? Like, to me, I just don't know what the upgrade is on the second line center. But yeah, I mean, with Marchand, like, he's the captain of Boston. Like, Bergeron and those guys put up with him for years. I think he's completely not in the JT Miller category when it comes to the locker room stuff.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years left on the JT Miller contract. So yeah, to your point, still a lot of time. And really, Elias Pettersson was someone that kind of popped into my head last weekend when all of this was still going on and we were all still kind of like on guard a little bit for if something else was going to happen. I was like, well, I don't know. Could you maybe be poking around Elias Pettersson and say, hey, we're going to replace that like easy goal scorer type player? Right. But to your point, Evan, he's in year 1 of an 8-year deal that's paying him over $11 million. I don't think you're going to get Vancouver to eat that for the entire, any portion of that for any length of the deal. I don't think you would be able to find a third team that'd be willing to say, hey, we'll eat $3 million for the next 7 seasons. So yeah, I don't see that as a possibility. Elliot Friedman did talk about also on 32 Thoughts today that there was an NHL GM who reached out to him saying that maybe Trevor Zegras to the Avs would be a decent fit. Friedman was quick to say, like, I haven't heard that anywhere. I'm not saying that's happening. I don't know. Megan and I were talking about it in the parking lot. I said that I could see that going one of 2 ways. Either he'd get in the locker room, Nate would get a hold of him, and he would, a winning environment, and it would really get Trevor Zegras going. Now suddenly you've got this young, highly skilled asset and player that you can plug into your top 6. Or he'd get in the locker room, Nathan McKinnon would get a hold of him and then would have to kill him.
I also just think, like, we've already seen it in these last 3 games, like, nobody wants to shoot the puck. Trevor Zegras is not a shooter. He's a playmaker. Mm-hmm. I don't think he is what they need anyway, personally. But I also, like, he just hasn't really been very good. Like, what the heck is his value at this point? Like,
That was what
He's been hurt a lot, and
I told Megan, I said, if you're getting him for like a third,
yeah,
sure.
So
Sure.
just from a stylistic point, like I think if they're going to go get somebody, they need like a shooter or somebody that's willing to shoot the puck and maybe more of a natural fit. And he's far from a sure thing, whereas I think they would maybe want a sure thing at this point when they're going for the cup.
I agree. I'm not interested in Zegras. I don't think.
Did you see the disgust just on her face, even when she said Zegras?
This is a player, I said he's unserious in Anaheim. I don't expect him to get serious in Colorado. And I get, to Jesse's point, we were talking in the parking lot outside of Ball Arena, like maybe he does in a winning environment. There's something to play for.
Mm-hmm.
But I also just feel like if the stakes are so low and you are just not committed in Anaheim, it doesn't send a very good message to me. And he bought in initially with Cronin and then he stopped. And so I could see an immediate connection with a player like McKinnon that just doesn't sustain, and eventually he falls off, reverts to old habits, lazy habits, and he's also the type of player that wants to do his own thing. So I don't know how much getting through to him there really would be, especially, and I say long term, his contract's just through next year, but I just don't know how long that experiment would be favorable for the Avs, and I don't think it'd be a good fit in the room for all the reasons we just said. So I'm not personally interested.
It would have to be for like very little. And the thing about JT Miller is the one thing about this Rantanen trade is that I think they were looking to extend this cup window a little bit by getting a little younger. Yep. If you trade for JT Miller, he's 32.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden it's shrunk back down probably a little bit. So Trevor Zegras, like maybe he would extend that a little bit, but like he's just such a wild card and he hasn't been consistent at any level recently.
I'd just love to see some Michigans in Colorado. I'll be honest. That's the big allure for me. We got a super chat here from our good friend Vaguely Sober. 6 days since last injury. Oh,
yeah, we hadn't updated it.
We haven't updated it.
That was back around something with Gerard that we had last updated it. So it's outdated.
I mean,
when was the last injury? I don't even know. I mean, I'm not convinced on Kale. After watching morning skate today, so we'll see.
Yeah, that's what I say. This might have to go back to 0 before we take it up any further. $1.99 from Vaguely Sober. Always a big thank you. Guys, I guess we can kind of wind this one down. I talked just kind of real briefly about tonight. Jared Bednar says they're treating these last 5 games like playoff games. They need the points. When you look at the playoff picture, like this is such an interesting season because they are still within like arm's reach of second in the division, but there's also teams within arm's reach of them that would move the Avs out of the playoffs. So there is a lot to play for. Jared Bednar made the point that there's teams that they are directly competing with, trying to catch or trying to catch them, that they've got these games right here. This is a St. Louis Blues team that the Avs need to beat here tonight. Yeah.
I mean, they have played more games than all these teams chasing them. Like, I don't think there's really like a good team chasing them, and they have the regulation win tiebreaker over all of them by quite a bit, but also like you can't give any team hope. And right now the Avs have just been so mediocre, in my opinion, that they've got to get it together here. And I understand where Jared's coming from.
Yeah. They've been playing like a wild card team. And if they want to be serious in a playoff run, I don't think it's the concern of making the playoffs at this point, but I do think there's an identity crisis that needs to be resolved. They need to stabilize. And I think there's a morale concern looming in losing Mikko, that it's important to string together some wins, make them dominant. I think that nothing brings a group together more than winning. So I think all of that's really important right now.
Well, I mean, Evan, you were in, because I skipped the Boston game, but you were in the Boston locker room and then also in the locker room after Rangers. I was in that room and then after the Islanders. And yeah, the difference in the way that this group felt after that win, and it was an exciting win right down to the last minute, but still you could just tell that was one like they needed from a moral standpoint. And so to Megan's point, like the wins maybe have a little bit more important than just the points right now for that locker room.
Yeah. And also they've been blah at home. Like they just haven't been a very good home team. I don't know what it is. Like Jared said, they alternate like every year, but they've just been like so blah at home. I think they're hovering right around 500. So
something about the media.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, you're playing the Blues and Philly, who just made a trade I do not understand
At all.
Yeah.
So you should walk away with at least 3 points this weekend, I would think.
Yeah, I think they need to. A couple more super chats here, and we will wrap things up right here from Drew, $4.99 Canadian. Give me Josh Norris for mitts plus something big, fast shooter. I guess Evan, you did mention it, and I kind of glossed over it there. There are a little bit of rumblings out there right now that the Avs might potentially be shopping Casey Middlestat. We talked about it, Megan, I think last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, about are you at the point where you would want to pull the trigger? And I said no. But hey, look, if you think that you can upgrade it, like you've already made the big trade, nothing is as big as what you just did. So if you think that you can upgrade on Casey Middlestat, you should do that. I don't know. I guess where are you guys at with that? Would you be looking to do that, or do you think that there's still enough runway here to get something out of him like what you got last year?
It's I love Casey Middlestat's game, but he just hasn't been very good for almost 3 months now. And I think he's getting better, but also if you're trying to win a cup, can you rely on that? Just
Right.
like a hope of him getting better. Josh Norris is one hit away from his shoulder blowing up for like the 4th time. So I don't know about that one. I like the player, but he's always hurt. So that one, that would be another risk in itself. But I wouldn't be convinced if they are like saying, hey, Casey's available if we can find the right fit. But I also just don't know if that fits out there. Like Casey's one of those reasons why, like I was asked the other day, are the Avs a Stanley Cup contender right now? Would I consider them? And I just said no. Like I don't think they are.
Yeah.
Like I think they have to make changes, and there's just too many questions around Val. Like I think he's a huge part of this. That unless those are figured out, like they just haven't looked like a Stanley Cup contender for most of the season. And maybe they turn it up here at the end, but from what I've seen so far this year, it's just been too much of a roller coaster to say that.
I think the issues with Middlestat are easy to identify, but they're not easy to diagnose the solution for, because to Evan's point, it's such a precarious position, the second line centerman, that I don't think is easy to fill. Like even spot shifting a Mikko Rantanen there, having seen Ross Colton a little bit there before, even thinking back to a JT Confer playing up in the lineup there, we never loved any of those solutions. And so a Middlestat not being a solution that we love there, the reasons are different, but it's just so hard to find what we want after Kadri. I think our palate was exposed to rich, finer things in life, and it's just so hard to find anything that fits quite like Kadri did. And so to that end, though, I don't know if there is something out there that would fit their needs at second line center that is any less of a gamble than hoping Casey gets his game together, if that makes sense. Like if they made the trade right now today, they still have only a little over 2 months to see if that works out. And so it's a huge gamble either way. It's a gamble to keep Casey, and it'll be easy to say in hindsight, see, it didn't work. They should have traded him for a second line center. But I think it's so easy to say that, but not easy to actually find something that will fit.
Well, then I also do remind people all the time, not that you need reminding, but Nazem Kadri thing was also a little up and down up until that very last season, where he, it all just kind of came together perfectly, and that was by a mile the best season of his career.
He'll never repeat,
right? Yeah. Ever. Nazem Kadri's a great player, but yeah, that to your point though, Megan, the Avs have had this kind of 2C issue ongoing for 1 year. The magic all worked, and it all came together, and Naz had this great season in tandem with the rest of the team. But yeah, this has been something that they've been trying to get figured out.
Just with Casey, like I'm still having such a hard time figuring out what happened here.
Yes,
because
seriously,
the one thing that when I watched him in Buffalo and watched his tape, and then when he came to the Avs, is that he was always so good along the boards and winning battles, and all of a sudden that's just stopped. And I don't know what happened. He says he's not hurt, and it's just like, it's really hard to wrap my brain around like what happened to, like, it wasn't just with the Avs. Like he has been a super productive 5-on-5 player for I think 3 seasons now, and it's just vanished.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think it's slowly coming back to him, and I think that's kind of the risk you take is like, well, what if he might find his game again with another team? Like he might still be that guy, and there's a very good chance he is because he's a super talented player. but like it's just hard to pinpoint what has happened here in the last 2 months.
Because even this season started well. Like, it wasn't just a strong finish to last
He
year.
misses Kobe.
I'm kidding that it's Kobe, but people talk about consistency in line mates, and I think there's validity to that, but he started the year with inconsistent line mates.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of that was feasting on the power play opportunity that he was getting at the start of the year, but I think it was just a Casey Middlestat trusting his instincts more because he's abandoned parts of his game that I think people forget were parts of his game. To Evan's point, he did used to be good along the wall.
Mm-hmm.
He's not the most physical player, but he could protect the puck, wear contact well, he was engaged, and so people see now just this kind of soft version of Middlestat and think that's what he's always been, but it's not.
Yeah.
He's been better than what we've seen. It all feels like such a concerning confidence issue, and it does seem like he's putting the pieces back together a little bit now, but for it to have been shattered to the level that it was is definitely worrisome. And I still love the Casey Middlestat that I saw more of in Buffalo after the trade and in the playoffs.
The playoffs are my thing. To your point, both of your guys' points about him being so physical. Like, I remember being pretty blown away, especially in that first round playoff series against the Jets, who everyone was like, oh man, they're going to come out and just run the Avs, physically. And like Casey Middlestat was, I mean, in every single mix along the wall, such a shifty player, able to pull pucks out of tight spaces along the wall. And yeah, just all of that kind of, dynamic offense of his just vanished one day.
Yeah, but he does miss Kobe. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
He does probably miss Kobe.
But if you look at like his natural stat trick, his best possession numbers this year were Kobe and LOC. Like I don't know if it's from years of playing with Buffalo. Like maybe he just plays better with grinders.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, because he's worked well with Lehkonen for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked that for a game and a half. That line of him, Lehkonen, and Drouin. Another one here from Vaguely Sober. Q for Evan.
Tracks. Oh God. Well, I am playing in a pond hockey tournament tomorrow. And I looked in my closet the other day and I saw it. I haven't put it on in years. Maybe I'll wear it tomorrow.
To practice?
No, I'm going to a pond hockey tournament.
Oh, you just said that. Okay.
I don't think that would go well if I wore it to practice.
I think it would be funny if we all wore ridiculous clothes on the same day, just once, and never spoke
nice.
of it again.
It's not something you wear when it's nice. You get hot real fast.
It is supposed to be nice tomorrow, and that is worth a round of applause. Shout out again, thank you guys, to our super chats. I think that's gonna do it. Evan, any final thoughts? Game tonight, or just everything we've kind of talked about?
No, I hope, after this settles, I hope people remember just Mikko was a truly elite player. And I think he will probably see his number retired at some point. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but he's 6th all time in points on the franchise list, including Quebec guys. Like, he's top 7 in goals. His playoff numbers are elite.
Ridiculous.
And like, I just think he was a huge part of this organization and getting them from the garbage to what they are now.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't think that should be forgotten. And then also, like, one of the things I saw after the Nate interview in Boston when we were there was like, people like, oh, why is the leader like talking about how it sucks and it's so down? I'm like, well, he was just being a human being.
Yeah.
Like, you can let him be a human being and just process the emotions that have happened in the last 15 hours. So I thought Nate was great after that game and in New York too.
Yeah,
so
he was fantastic. Megan?
Yeah. A decade-long friendship.
Yeah.
I think you're allowed to mourn and process not going to see the person you were showing up to the rink every day with. I think that is probably a gut punch. And Mason McTavish is who I think the Avs should acquire from Anaheim, not Trevor Zegras.
You didn't say Troy Terry?
Look, the Troy Terry thing is going to always be alive and well.
She's got a Troy Terry to the Avs tattoo, actually.
Yeah. I was trying to think of the acronym on the spot, but I'm not that quick.
Well, we saw
TTTA.
Because great minds think alike. We asked the same question about the power play. One thing Jared said yesterday is like, we just don't have right shots ever. Is what he said. He maybe wants another one in Troy Terry.
I would love Troy Terry. That one feels too unrealistic.
That one is another thing where it's like assets. They don't have them.
Yeah.
Can I interest you in Oscar Alausson? Cronin, close your ears. You don't know him. He's different now.
He'll be different.
He'll be different
Anaheim.
in Anaheim.
The sunshine will help.
He needs vitamin D.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it. Did I miss? No, Pyramid Show coming next week. We did just want to put a capper on everything that happened this week. It would have normally been a Pyramid Show today, but we weren't expecting the Avs to flip everything upside down when we were initially planning that. So with it being the 1 week anniversary, I guess, if you will.
This is dramatic.
I wanted to find a better word. My brain only would spit out anniversary. With it being 1 week removed, we did just want to, like I said, kind of put a cap on all of it. Evan, big thanks for stopping by and helping us kind of do that. I know you're sick of talking about it. We're sick of talking about it. But we're moving on from here. But it did feel like we needed to sit down and kind of just pour over things, not the teams back home one more time. And then all the additional news of the salary cap going up. I also just wanted us to be able to address all that. So Pyramid Show coming next week. And yeah, that's going to do it. I'm Jesse Montano. It's Meghan Angley. Evan Rawal of the Denver Gazette joining us here today. Make sure you're checking out all of his work on Twitter, posts on the Denver Gazette, and then he was on the Denver Gazette Sports Podcast earlier this week, going over a lot of the same stuff that you heard us talk about here. So please check out all of his work. We'll be back at it tonight. Post-game coverage, all that good stuff as the Avs take on the St. Louis Blues. For Megan, Evan, Chloe behind the glass, I'm Jesse Montano. Thanks so much for tuning in. We will talk to you guys very soon. Have a good one.